This episode of Twin Cities Trekkies is brought to you by Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor before, let me explain. First of all, it's free. There are creation tools that help you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. You can easily make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership required. They'll also help you to distribute your podcast so it can be heard on many different platforms, such as Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It's all you need in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Welcome to episode 5 of Twin Cities Trekkies. I am Wes.
And I'm Kenzie.
And today, this episode is going to be dealing with, since it is National Women's History Month, we're going to talk about the women of Star Trek. And if you did, I'm going to let you guys know, if you did hear the Minnesota Star Trek Nerd podcast back in early of 2019, I had done a similar kind of thing, in which I had two people from the UK and the two people from the United States talking about their favorite female characters, and I was the one facilitating this discussion. But since I know I'm doing this topic again because it's Women's History Month and it's March, I feel it is necessary for Kenzie to lead the discussion this time around because my wife felt the need that my wife Holly, just I don't know, that's her name, Holly. She felt the need that if I don't know, it could be really weird if a guy was running a discussion about women of Star Trek.
Yeah, so, I don't think there's anything personally wrong with that, but I think it's really, really awesome to just hand off that baton and be like, "Hey, we got a lady here, we got a gal. Like, why don't we have you chat about it?" But I would say we both are having a conversation, so let's say either of us are leading one way or the other. But just it's nice to have another perspective, and I get a lady's perspective of looking at women of Trek.
Yeah, but because if it was a bunch of guys talking about women of Star Trek, the one thing that everyone would talk about would be how they look.
Yeah, I was like kind of interested in that because when I was growing up, like I guess that's something like I personally didn't really focus on a lot, except in the sense of women in Star Trek and their beauty being used as some weird double standard of like you don't believe that someone's like a super smart person because of how pretty they are or something like that, or that they don't gain as much respect because they're not considered pretty by society standards. And like, that's always been an interesting thing. But I just thought it was interesting that was something that you had noted, being like, we're not going to talk about looks. And I'm like, is that the way that conversation goes a lot? And I mean, it was something that I did when I was kind of just looking up, like, I was like, I just kind of want to look up then, like, because like that's something that came up and you had mentioned a few times, and I'm like, is that a thing that people do? Like that's how the conversation usually goes, because you have characters like Janeway or Seven of Nine, and to be fair, a lot of women were put on Star Trek as eye candy originally, but a lot of them ended up having major roles and being important characters in the series. But then I started looking things up, and it's like a lot of things that did pop up were like 30 hottest women of Star Trek, and I'm like, wow, really? I'm like, that's so interesting. Like, I guess I just never had a lot of conversation around like, ooh, who's the hottest character? I'm like, I don't know. It was definitely more like, I think the closest that came down to, but it was more in the context of how she was brought on to the show versus how her character developed, was Seven of Nine, because Jerry Ryan was brought on to be like totally eye candy and upping viewership for Voyager. And then she ended up just being this amazing character that I looked up to growing up, where I'm like, what an awesome character. And despite people holding that weird, like, you're too pretty to be smart type of thing, it's like, no, those are separate entities. You don't have to be one or the other. It's not a binary.
Yep. So I'll let you guys know how to get in touch with us. Our email address is tctrekkiespodcast@gmail.com. Perfectly free. I feel that it's perfectly free to send an email to us. We would gladly read your email. Granted, I'd be the one probably reading it, but because I have access to it, I'm the one who created it. But that's okay, But then also you can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/TC Trekkies Pod, which is also the same handle. We are now on Instagram. Hey, I'm on Instagram myself, but I thought, okay, I had my wife help me with that because she runs a cat page on her a separate Instagram account for her cat, so for our cat. So I was trying to figure out, okay, how do I do that? So she helped me how to do that. So
and it's really easy to run a few different profiles on Instagram. I have a few different profiles, like the Minneapolis St. Patrick's Day Association, like all the random accounts that I help with in the area. So,
definitely.
You can also reach out to us on our personal accounts too. Like, if you have ever any feedback, you can find either of us. And I think we're listed in both the descriptions of the Facebook group page and on the Instagram. So
you can find it on me. For me, it's for that. I know that it's on your personal description, but it's on mine. If you search Wesley_whatnot, it is there. The Instagram handle is there along with our personal profiles. So it's on TC Trekkies Pod. We are available on it's been distributed pretty much everywhere now, our podcast. I just found out recently that Twin Cities Trekkies is now on Apple Podcasts. So if for some reason I can probably find out how to get our because I don't have an Apple iPhone anymore, so I can't know. I don't know if
part of the Apple Club.
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm recording through a MacBook, but that's different. But I don't have an iPhone anymore. I used to have an iPhone, so I can't tell if anybody is sending written reviews or 5-star ratings. So I'm just gonna have to find out how to do that without with using an Android or something like that. But we are on Apple Podcasts now, so hooray! Because I know that people that I know listen through Apple and stuff like that. Also available on TuneIn and available on other podcast sites like Google Podcast and Spotify, which is the main company behind Anchor.fm. So they're the ones who bought Spotify is the one who bought Anchor back in 2019. So they are the ones who host our feed and stuff like that. You can leave us voicemails through that. I am working on trying to get a separate phone number for us, just so we can I found out you can get it from like Google Voice. So I know it's like a free phone number. You
how we used to dial into my apartment complexes. Is like if you wanted to use the door to check people in, you had a Google number associated with your apartment. So I'm working on trying to get that so we can potentially get voicemails.
Inaccurate data in error.
I actually found out it is not a free service. Google Voice actually costs money. So if you want to leave a voice message, feel free to either message us personally, or you can go to anchor.fm/twin-cities-trekkies.
I wish I would have asked, coordinated with one of my friends. Like she wants to be on here soon with us as a guest, and
definitely. And I know that my friend Amy out in Vegas wants to be on this show, and she's a mentor of mine regarding this with this hobby. So thank you, if Amy Nelson, if you're listening right now, thank you. That's her name, Amy Nelson. So if you're listening, Amy, thank you. So we'll get you on the show. I know we will. So, but definitely, so you can comments, feedback, any episode suggestions are welcome. Just keep in mind they're going to be used. In a future episode. Which we're going to briefly talk about right now. We actually have voice messages for the first time ever. Here is Charlie of the Mavcast. A little bit of history. I have been promoting this podcast in a group of podcasters, and we share our links and whatnot. He was able to find this podcast via the anchor.fm link.
Hi guys, Charlie Maverick here from the Mavcast audio blog. Just want to let you guys know that you sound great Great product. I like the fandom going on here. Keep up the good work, and God bless.
Thank you so much for your voice message, Charlie. As everyone else can be aware, you can find our link on anchor.fm. You can leave a voice message that way. Or if you just want to comment, that's perfectly fine too. One comment we had on the last week's episode, which is episode 3, talking about the fashion of Star Trek, the Starfleet uniforms. My friend Jim Stoffel, he's a Trek fan out in California. I think that's where he lives. He said something about he enjoyed our conversation. It was pretty much what it was. It was like the Starfleet uniforms have not been talked about very much in podcasting and Star Trek. So we actually did something that was unique. So and he really enjoyed our discussion. And
I saw that comment, and I appreciated that. I'm like, hey, that's what we're doing. We're having conversations about things we love about Star Trek and things we find interesting. So that was a big thing to hear, that people appreciate listening to me ramble on about why I think shoulder pads in the Romulan and Vulcan outfits are cool, as well as my favorite uniform throughout all the series and movies.
Yep, exactly. And I actually kind of struggled trying to find the episode title too. So, but the title comes from what I said. So, about the Monster Maroons, Monster Maroon uniforms, that they would survive a Minnesota winter. So, but definitely, thank you so much for your comment, Jim. It's just a paraphrase of what you said, but I'm not going to read it for verbatim, but, we could definitely do that later on. Do a different version of that later on, but that's okay. But thank you so much for your comment, Jim. I'm glad you appreciate that.
That information is not on file.
What Jim actually said was the following. This week's episode was a good episode. No one talks about the fashion of Trek that often. I had a great time listening. LLAP. It's funny about how podcasting can influence what we did 2 weeks ago regarding the uniforms of Star Trek, and the official Star Trek website does an article about what we talked about. Just like roughly about a week and a half later, I'm like, we beat you to it. I don't mean to sound petty, but towards the Star Trek official Star Trek website and any of the writers who do write articles for them, it's just like, we talked about this before you did, so I'm sorry if I'm a little bit petty and say, hey, we beat you. But that's okay. It's perfectly fine. So about the women of Star Trek, since it is National Women's History Month, we're not going to talk. We're not going to talk about the looks of these characters we talk
unless
about.
It plays into
unless it plays into the character itself.
Yeah. I think it's important to talk about looks in Star Trek, not about who we think is hot, but how their looks played a role in the way they paved their role in Star Trek.
Yes.
Because
that's fine.
It almost becomes like an antithesis thing for people like 7 of 9 or people like Tasha Yar, who people were like, short haircut seems weird, and then making a big deal about it. Like, that looks and women in Star Trek play a huge role in how they're perceived and how they're respected and how they sort of clash and also work together to make a big role for a woman. Like, it becomes an essential part of representing women in even a progressive show. Like, looking at the first episode ever of Star Trek, the pilot, and just how the biggest critics of that were around her being a woman and how she looked and how she sounded and all of these other factors. And her biggest critics ended up being more so women than even men, like women not liking to see a woman in that role. And just this weird thing of like, why is that? And that's an interesting sign of the times and how do we move past this? So
Yep.
I think that it can go both ways, but yeah, I think we're trying to focus on, we're not sitting here listing our top 10 like hottest Star Trek characters.
Of course
today.
not.
It'll be about what it means to be a woman in Star Trek, and like what their role is and how they've impacted the series as a whole.
Yep, definitely. So yeah, definitely we're not going to talk about their looks. That was numero uno rule, the number one rule I wanted to do when we talked about this, because I know that, I'm a guy. I would talk about how they look. It's just a natural guy response, but it's just natural, at least for me.
Yeah,
but,
and I just thought that was like kind of a cool thing. So I'm just like that I learned something, because I guess it was never something, even when I was growing up, like my dad never talked about like the women characters, or like none of his friends really like focused on that. It was more like the only one I ever heard anything about was Seven of Nine, and that was just mostly like, it's sort of like kind of a cool way to set her up, because it seems really paradoxical, because her character is just completely cut and dry person, and to make her look like that, it was sort of like a play on that, like being like, ooh, very alluring character, but look at how she is as a person. Can you ignore that? Can you respect her without like objectifying her?
Yeah,
it worked. It was a really cool thing to see that it's like, yeah, some people might think that she's like stereotypically super pretty and like classic, like sexy woman type of trope, but that's not how her character's written, and she is not at all someone like that. And I think that was just a really cool way to kind of play on that. So it is like some complexities to like looks and how they play into their existence in the show.
Yeah, definitely. So, another thing I want to talk about regarding these women of Star Trek is, when I presented this idea to Kenzie, I wanted to not talk about their looks, but I wanted to talk about their intelligence and their ability to get things done, because women are just as equally capable as men of doing the same job. I just want to say that right now. They're just as equally capable. because if I said anything different like that, I know it would be viewed as completely sexist. So I know that when I have many intelligent women in my life, like you, for example. But I also have my wife, and I also have my best friend and stuff like that. So who are also intelligent women and can do the jobs that men can. I know they can. So that I know I'm like it's like a cut and dry kind of phrase, but I firmly believe that women can do the same things as men. Women can do the same things as men. They can be the like barriers are always broken. Gender barriers are always broken. Like I can bring up something like with sports. We now have female referees in the National Football League, for example. They are they're equally as capable of doing that as a man could.
Yeah.
So,
and that's always the interesting thing, because you say like people say that, and like it's like, yeah, perfect, but it's the struggle of getting to that point that's usually something where it's like, oh yeah, no, women are totally capable, but how are they going to get to the point where they can? Because that's usually the issue. It's not so much that questioning whether a woman can do it or not so much. Even now, it's these weird like invisible obstacles of like preconceived notions about it. Like I've even experienced things like someone maybe like people who think that they're like, oh, like that I'm pretty or something, will then make some comment like, I wouldn't think that you were like a software engineer, or some comment about there's no way that you're that smart. And it's like, why is that? That's a really interesting, like, is it because hello bird clock, I absolutely love it every time, but I just think it's like a weird thing about how does that conversation even start in someone's head? Like, how is that something that someone carries with them, being like, oh, I'm surprised you're a software engineer. Why? Because of how you look. Like, that's a weird thing of like, so why is that? Why is that? I don't see it as often with men. I think the most stereotypical thing I see with men in looks is when someone's like very nerdy, but if they don't have like the stereotype indicators of a nerd, like glasses or something, it's just so dumb. But being like, you don't look like a nerd, it doesn't look like you like Star Trek or something. That's a really weird internalized thing. Like, why is that you would think that? So I've always just kind of, as I've grown up and seen all these characters throughout Star Trek and how they're perceived, how they're portrayed in the show, it's always just been something that has been in the background. And then being a woman myself, I'm going into the science world and how I'm perceived and how I have to act in certain spaces almost to like gain respect or to be treated as an equal, even if people are like, oh no, you're super smart. But now I'm intimidated because for whatever reason, like, oh, you're too pretty, oh, you're too talkative, oh, like all these things that are not expected of somebody in that space. So I think that's sort of a big thing that Star Trek pushes, especially in the later series where they introduce these characters that kind of push those internalized perceptions of how women should be and kind of put that in the forefront and make you question, like, why do I feel weird that this character has a short haircut, or why do I feel weird that she's really assertive when she talks, and like pushing that conversation to be like, yeah, why is that? Can we change that? Can we not have you feel that way?
Yeah, exactly. And like we can talk about like characters like Seven and Janeway, and like the one that made me think about was Janeway actually. Yeah, this whole discussion, because obviously she's gonna come back soon, to Star Trek in Paramount Plus's Star Trek Prodigy, coming out later this year. I'm kind of curious to know how that's gonna work now in the 21st century. Like, I mean, that's the name of what I thought is like, she's the first female lead captain of a Star Trek show until Michael Burnham. But first female lead of a Star Trek show, Kate Mulgrew. I mean, I have admired Mulgrew for ages as an actress. She's done a lot of other things besides Star Trek, like Red Reznikov in Orange Is the New Black, for example. I've seen her in a lot of other shows, but a lot of other shows and stuff like that. Like her very first show was Ryan's Hope, the old 70s soap opera, stuff like that. But when she became Catherine Janeway, she was the second actress to play the character, by the way.
Yeah.
After Genevieve Bujold quit after a day and a half of doing the pilot, because she didn't feel she was capable of doing episodic television, which is unfortunate because speaking of Genevieve Bujold, I think I've never seen her in anything, but I think if she had stuck with Voyager, I think the show could have been a little bit I think this is a what if scenario. If she was still available, if she was still doing if she still did Voyager, at that time the character was named Nicole Janeway. So if she had stuck with with Voyager, and stuff like that, and all the changes other than that, like with Jerry Ryan and other in 7 of 9 and the other changes that Voyager went through throughout its 7 years, because there definitely is a difference in quality between the first and second as opposed to the 6th and 7th. For example, if she had stuck with it, what would have happened? I think about that sometimes when I watch Voyager now, because I did see the test footage of Bujold as Janeway. And she talks like in a very soft voice. I understand because she's like doing like a very dramatic saying of it. I understand because she was a dramatic actress.
But it's an interesting way to see the take and how it could have been different. Maybe it would have been perceived differently by people. Like Catherine Janeway as a character played by Kate Mulgrew definitely has this really assertive, no nonsense, like let's get this done attitude. And I mean, there's been plenty of women that have come before her that have paved a big part of women in Star Trek, including the first lady of Star Trek, like
Majel Barrett.
Majel Barrett's like a huge deal, like trying to make her number one in the pilot, and people being like, nope, I can't handle that. And just that that sort of this trailblazing attempt throughout the first series to have characters that can be impressionable, to being like trying to get women on the screen, be like, look, they exist, they are capable, and all the hoops that were jumped through to get Uhura on the show.
Yep.
I mean, casting someone as the Romulan commander being a female, like,
oh yeah, and yep,
like, but you just have all these attempts at, you know, trying to put up all these characters, and then looking at like Beverly Crusher and Deanna Troi, and then you have Tasha Yar, and like trying to get these characters like to sort of break these roles that we have, where a lot of times, especially in the original series, the women were just these like eye candy aliens that were kind of side characters to a main plot, and something that Kirk could flirt with on the show. And yeah, but it's like just seeing them, you know, pave that way, and then seeing Catherine Janeway like on screen is pretty awesome. Like, especially as a young girl, being like, oh, nice, like there's so many women that, you know, are on this show. And then even like watching Deep Space Nine and seeing like Kira like being such a strong character too, and I'm like, I can appreciate that. And it's something that people are shocked by sometimes, her abrasiveness and assertiveness. But that's the whole point, where it's like, that should be something that's like, I don't expect this from a woman. It's just like, that's her personality. It doesn't have to be tied to, that's not something I'd usually expect from a woman.
Yeah, exactly.
And even in the amazing characters, like ones who lead, I also have a thing for like the women in Star Trek that I love to hate, like the villains, like the or Seska in Voyager. I mean, you have these really strong villains that are like, you love to hate them. They're like, oh, they're such good characters, and they're such strong characters, you know. But they also, it's like, oh man, you love to dislike them so much, where it's like they're such a great character that they're a true villain that you actually like, wow, this frustrates me.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, definitely we could talk about that too. But you know, like I like Kate Mulgrew, Catherine Janeway. Yeah, definitely. Like, other than TNG, Voyager was was the show I watched when I grew up too. Other than TNG, but definitely I see this capable woman. I have that thought ever since in my head, and like, women can do the same thing as men. You know, sometimes like that. You know, and you know, she did. I'll never forget that one scene in the first season of Voyager where she confronts Kala for the first time. You know, it's like, you know, I don't take bullies, and I don't like threats, and I don't like you. Yeah. I don't like bullies, and I don't like threats. And she was like, and she's like, that whole scene when she confronts him about it, you know, it's like, you can stop us, but you know, I will respond with all the unique technologies at my command. You know, you know, she tells him off, and I'm going like, whoa. Whoa, that's no nonsense right there. And you know, same with Seven of Nine. You know, yes, she was created to by the beginning of the third season, Voyager's viewership was dwindling, unfortunately, to the point where UPN had a choice: either cancel it or continue it. And from what I understand about how she became to be, was they were going to make a casting change. That was no question. They were thinking like, okay, what characters are not working, you know, and stuff like that. Well, the original plan was to get rid of Harry Kim. Yep. The original was to kill him off. And, you know, parts of that original storyline are in the Scorpion 2-parter. Yep. But then Garrett Wang goes to Rick Berman and says, hey, I just been named one of People magazine's 30 hottest guys in Hollywood, or something like that. That's why I understand. Or some article that was published in People magazine or Variety. I don't remember which one it was, but it doesn't matter. But so they changed their mind, and unfortunately, who ended up getting the axe was Jennifer Lean as Kess. So, and I mean, don't get me wrong. I've watched the first 3 seasons of Voyager. I think Kes is very ill-defined.
I actually, like, I get so much flack for it, but I love Kes because I've always been a very bubbly character, and people sometimes refer to her as just being this really annoying character, and I'm like, yeah, but I kind of feel for her because I feel that I like to be a very gentle, fairy-like person in situations, and that's how she was. And she was naive and innocent, and figuring out her place in the universe. And I liked her character growth. It was just sort of like it was just kind of weird to see it, developing alongside other plots going on in Voyager as it found its voice as a series.
Yeah, it was like Kes's development, in my opinion, goes up gradually in like the first 2 seasons, goes down a little bit in the middle of the second season, goes up a little bit in the third season, and then just crashes because she leaves.
Yeah.
So it's like the zigzag chart. If you had to put a chart up for Kes's development, that's how I would picture it as. It's just a zigzag line, which is unfortunate, but because it's unfortunate because there are episodes that Jennifer Lien did very well acted in the first 3 years, like Warlord. I think, for example, when she gets her mind gets taken over by this warlord and stuff like that.
Yeah.
She becomes this evil character, and she was pretty good at playing that, and other things as well. When the ship encountered that pool of life forms outside, and it accelerated her reproductive process, and she was like freaking out and stuff like that. I'm like a little bit too young for this, and she was freaking out about that, and she gives Janeway a hug, going like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." I mean, I think she gives Janeway a hug and stuff like that, and it's like a really kind of heartwarming moment, for example. So I mean, like I said, like it goes up, goes down, goes up, and then crashes. So, which is unfortunate, but that's what happened. So in comes Jerry Ryan, which was to boost the 18 to 49 male demographic, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I would always joke though about that, because it was just like, I guess Star Trek can't handle 2 short blonde girls, like I guess like 2 short-haired blonde girls. It was just such a weird thing to be around. I'm like, why not both? But it became this thing, like that's again sign of the times feeling, where it almost feels like if you have like too many on screen, that somehow that might drop ratings too. So there's this weird thing of like balancing, like, oh yeah, like progressive, and we love how they went on the show, but we can't have too many strong women characters because it might throw people off, or like be a little too much for people. Like I think there was always a lot of fear with introducing strong female leads, and having a backlash to that, because it happened. The original origin story of Star Trek, that's literally what happened, where there was a ton of backlash for being like, here's a sci-fi concept. In the future, women can be second in command. They can be these really strong characters. They can be assertive. They can do whatever they want, like just like men. And people just could not handle it. Like people could handle a spaceship being flown in space and dealing with aliens, but somehow those social concepts of the future just did not translate well. Like which is always an interesting topic, where like you're talking about a show that takes place in far into the future, dealing with concepts that we haven't even gotten to play around with as humans, and yet the biggest issues that people have with a show that takes place in space is that there's a lady sitting in second in command, and that she talks a little too strongly.
Yeah, which is unfortunate, because when they were testing the cage to a test audience, NBC cited the fact that it was mainly women who didn't like. They cited the fact that women didn't like number 1 as second in command.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and then unfortunately that translated into the actual series proper. Unfortunately, the sexism. Because there's an episode, I think it's the final episode, Turnabout Intruder, in which Janice Lester is trying to be in command of the Enterprise as Captain Kirk.
Yeah.
But because of the fact that women can't command a starship. I'm glad that the later shows just poof that out of existence because that's completely unprogressive. And
it says a lot about internalized sexism too, because of that's something like, why would a woman feel uncomfortable seeing a woman in power? Because it's been told all her life that she's not allowed to. So when you see something like that, you're like, no way, because I would be stressed out being in that situation because I know I'd be scrutinized for it. So I don't like this. Like, I mean, even growing up, that was something that was often debated among me and my lady friends about. I really love science from a young age on, but it was this weird conversation that would happen a lot with a lot of my gal friends growing up that, oh, science is for boys. Like, no, I don't want to be seen as like a nerd or ugly, and like these terms used tying to science, and it's like, that doesn't have to be that way. Or like, I want to like play with makeup and dolls and stuff. I'm like, yeah, I do too. I literally do. But I also love science too. And I love space and astronomy, and it doesn't have to be a binary, and it doesn't come with like a territory of, this is like, you don't have to be boxed in by what you like. And just because you like something doesn't mean you're suddenly defined by that, and then that's how you have to be defined from that point on. And it's like, oh, you like astronomy? Cool. You can't like makeup anymore. You can't wear dresses anymore. You can't do all these things because you like science now. And it's like, no, we can do both. Like, easy. Doesn't matter. Like, but it's this weird internalized thing of like, I'd ask my friends a lot, like, why do you feel that way? Like, why are you afraid to say that you like a subject in science? And it's mostly gone away now, but there's definitely tendrils of that even in the 90s, like growing up, that was still something that it was uncool, or that they were going to face backlash because of that. Like, I would talk all the time about Voyager, and my friends being like, oh, I can't believe you watch Star Trek. And it's like, yeah, but the captain is a female, and like, and it doesn't even matter. Like, the characters are great. They're all inspiring characters, and I love how the show's written. Like, you're my favorite episode so far, and like being like, ew, no, I don't like Star Trek. And it's like, but why? I mean, it's nice to see that conversation going. And a lot of my friends like reclaimed that now, like revisiting why they felt the need to so like defensively go, I don't like science, no way. Like, that somehow like excuses them of the shame that comes with, or the shame and the criticism that comes with liking something like that. And I think that just has a lot to say about, different generations and how they, box women into these certain stereotypes and attributes, and watching them try to stray away from that. And that's why I think, like, for the original episode, why that was such a big deal. Women did have negative things to say, because for so long women were told, that's not something that you should even be interested in. And they grew up thinking that. So when they finally do see a woman, they're like, no way. There's no way that she should be allowed to do that, because I'm not allowed to do that. And I've been told my whole life that's ridiculous. So now I feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, completely. That's awesome that you got that people like you are reclaiming the fact that of like the fact that I can do these things and still be what I want to be.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I really applaud you, Kenzie, for saying that. That's actually awesome to hear. So, but definitely, like, like now I want to like about those characters. The one I really like nowadays on the modern shows, like the ones from Alex Kurtzman. I mean, granted, right now I think Kurtzman treats his female characters better than Rick Berman did, and I have a really strong opinion about Rick Berman. I think he was a misogynistic pig. That's what I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say for right now. We could talk about that later in another episode, how I personally feel about him. But because I know when Rick Berman was running Star Trek, the female characters, let's just say it, they were treated. I mean, they were off camera. They were treated like objects. Actresses like Terry Farrell, for example, or Julian Blaylock. who's just celebrated a birthday the other day. But happy birthday. But
Yeah.
yeah, Julian Blaylock from Enterprise, Linda Park, stuff like that. And unfortunately, that's the way he ran it, unfortunately, and it's really kind of sad. And then like Gates McFadden, granted, when Berman was running Star Trek when she was fired after the first season of Next Generation, that's the general consensus I've heard, that she was fired. Maurice Hurley, who was the head writer at the time, fired her because of the perceived sexism in the first season of Next Generation scripts. If you watch episodes like The Naked Now or Angel One, they are extremely sexist. I mean, you mentioned Tasha Yar. I know you did. Yep. So in the first season, I mean, I kind of wish she would have stayed personally. I would have wanted, but she was pretty much, Denise Crosby was there just to say, aye, Captain, at one point. But, in The Naked Now, for example, she's seen promiscuous and stuff like that. And unfortunately, it's unfortunate that, it was a science fiction concept that a virus changes your inhibitions. And it was a horrible remake of The Naked Time, from the original series, which, by the way, is actually one of my favorites from the first season of that show. But because it's good, but they horribly remade it in Next Generation. And it's like that whole scene with, are you fully functional, Data? And it's like, come on. Yeah. I watch it now as me being a 31-year-old as opposed to like a 16, 17-year-old me. I'm going like, I watch it now. I'm going like, what the heck were they thinking? Because of this perceived perception of women being, like I mentioned before, the one thing that guys cling to whenever they see a hot woman on the show, like, oh God, she's hot. Yeah. But, and, let's face it, she was, Denise Crosby in that little scene, I'll freely admit that she did look, stunning. But it's like, you think about it now, you go like, if I was, 15-year-old me would go like, oh, wow. But 31-year-old me, I'm going like, what the heck?
Yeah. Because it's kind of weird to see stuff like that where it's like, like, I mean, that's sort of like, I can definitely tell that a lot of Star Trek, especially the original series, was written through the male gaze. Like a lot of times, like, so what they're looking at and what they're focusing on is definitely a lot of like, ooh, pretty lady, and like, ooh, look at this plot point that's happening because they're being seduced by a female character, or like I'm causing some sort of issue on board because of a lady's existence on the board. Like it's kind of weird to watch that and you're like, why is that an issue? Or why is this like the focus? But it's like, most of the writers are men. So yeah, like it becomes a boys club a little bit of like, and this speaks to the power of diversity, even in something behind the scenes, like not even so much putting women in front of a camera, but behind the scenes, like how big of a difference having female writers or having writers of different backgrounds than just being like a bunch of midlife white guys writing about their dreams in space. Like it becomes this really big thing of it, like as the show's developed, like they definitely have a sense of growing as a series because of diversifying their writers and diversifying the cast. Like, and it speaks for itself because a lot of people watching Star Trek, especially from new to old, can feel that pain, like growing pain of like lack of diversity becoming this really linear perspective of how the characters act, how they should act, like what's going on in every episode. So I appreciate that growth, and it's very visible too. And you can tell that in these newer shows that they have a lot more diversity in writers and
directors
and like that there's just a lot more happening behind the scenes, considering different perspectives than what the original series had, or even in Next Generation.
Yeah, because we have now, the very first female director ended up was the first one on TNG, Gabrielle Beaumont. She was the very first female director of Star Trek. She directed, I think, like 10 episodes over the course of over the Berman era, so of Trek. So stuff like that. She was the first crusader in doing that, and now we got directors like Hanelle Culpepper who direct Discovery and Picard and stuff like that, and it's like it paved the way for that at least. And we got more female writers, obviously, especially in the newer shows, which is good for my opinion. But the one I really, speaking of the newer shows, the one female character that I really do like and I really enjoy how she acts is Sylvia Tilly, played by Mary Wiseman. I mean, it's not. I like her because she's like, she's a very intelligent character. I think she is very intelligent, even though sometimes she can be very shy and very nervous.
She's ambitious.
Yeah, but she can be vicious, but she can be. And she's very much into the math. Like, this is the power of math, people.
Yeah, she's ambitious.
I remember that. Oh. And like I mentioned earlier, my friend Amy, when I first watched that episode, that first episode of season 2 of Discovery, she said, "This is the power of math, people." Well, my friend Amy is a math teacher, so I immediately thought of her. So it's like, oh, that's awesome. There you go. There's a little shout out for you.
Yeah, it's nice to see a character whose role is this really ambitious, starry-eyed thing for science. It's just that, and I love how sincere she is. Like, she just has this really, like, I feel that way, where it just, like, I get so excited about when something like works. Like, being a physics and math and computer science person, it's just like, look at the beauty of using science to do something amazing, or drive something by data and science. Like, it's just so cool to see a character that is just so ambitious about that, and you see the love and passion for a subject like that, and it doesn't have to tie into her looks or how people perceive her, or like how her character is able to influence others using those things. Like, it's just like, hey, I would love to captain something myself someday, and like have these really high ambitions, but also I will do anything to get through to these goals. And I just think she's just such a compassionate character while being super into science. Like, that is something where like 7 of 9, very science oriented, very smart character. Like, her whole thing, like, you basically navigating Star Trek or like Voyager back to Federation space by finding the most optimal path and using algorithms to get them back as quickly as they can is a huge deal. But it becomes a thing where she has to be rigid then, because she likes science and analytical. And she, like, that Sylvia Tilly instead is like a super fun, bright, bubbly character, but also extremely smart and, super driven. And it doesn't have to be this archetype of, oh, you're into science, be super unemotional, super logical. That's it. Like, that's not a thing. That's a stereotype. Like,
yeah,
some people might be that way, but that's not how they have to be. They don't have to all be Spock or 7 of 9 when they really like science. They can be fun-loving and happy and be extroverts and exciting people, all while liking science.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the character I really liked in this new era of Trek. For female characters is Sylvia Tilly because of that reason. So but I think we should move on to the female, like we mentioned before about the villainesses. Like, I will start off with this one. The one that really gets under my skin, and I applaud the actress's performance for this, is Kai Wynn.
Yep.
Played by Louise Fletcher. So and whenever I watch DS9 and she's ever in it, I get like bugs in. I mean, I get. She makes my skin crawl because it's like I want to be so mad at her. I want to punch the TV at her and going like, "Oh, you!"
Yeah,
That's how I feel. It's like, and I have to applaud Louise Fletcher for playing that role with just that degree of villainy that you see her on screen, you're automatically pissed. So, and when she clashes with Cisco on many different issues relating to Bajoran affairs, she gets to get her nose in it because she apparently cares.
Yeah.
And she it's just she makes my skin crawl and it makes me mad. Just it made me think whenever I see her, I think of Donald Trump. So yeah. even though we mentioned Gul Dukat with Trump before, I think of more Kai Wynn when I think of him. So
yeah, and that's a big thing for me. Like I always love that subject because having female characters shouldn't be about just trying to like, ooh, look at the super like respectable character, because we have plenty of like men villains that it's like but there's something to be said about appreciating their existence, regardless of like, oh yeah, I hate them so much, but that's the point, right? You're passionate about not liking them, and that's why it's great. They're an important part of having exciting shows and film, and women's representation shouldn't just stop at making really inspiring, cool heroes, but having really skin crawly, annoying villains that make you remember them. Like you remember that they're hard to deal with, and I love that. Like it's just, I mean, Seska is a huge character all throughout Voyager, and she is constantly causing trouble. Like from being originally like undercover and like trying to cause issues on Voyager, and because she's originally she altered herself to look like a Bajoran, yep. But she's actually a Cardassian, and then she was part of the Maquis, which they tried to break that up when they had to make their way back to Federation space. But then it just turned into this weird thing where she was like double operative, like stealing from the Maquis and also then stealing from the Federation. And then later on, she ends up joining the Kazon and, still causing issues all throughout the series. And I mean, I loved it because every time you see her show up, you're like, oh no, there's going to be so much like manipulation that's happening. And she, like being a spy, it's like, I can't tell, like, what her intentions are. Does she have good intentions? Probably not. Like after you've seen her a few times, but I love her character because it's such a great writing of somebody that I'm just like, she's desperate to get what she wants, and it's respectable, but also it's like, dang, you are really messing up a lot of people's lives and you're so selfish, and what a great character.
Yeah.
War Queen is my other like favorite of just like her sentience and omnipotence, like omnipotence. Yeah, one of those words.
Yeah.
refrigerator for some reason I struggle to say too. Interesting words that are hard to pronounce. But the War Queen is sort of all over it throughout the later Star Trek series, and I always appreciate her existence too, because she's not real, like she has good intentions. Like the Borg, I like Borg as a villain as a whole because they seem to have like this utopian goal of like, well, we all want to be a collective because we're all taking the best parts of all these different species and working together to make the best group and community out of it. But it just does not, on paper it seems cool, but in practice is definitely not cool. I mean, and it's really messed up. And the Borg Queen truly believes in this vision of having this perfect community and collective of different people and across the universe, like having all these different species that would be an important aspect of the Borg, including creeping on Data and being like, oh, you'd be perfect. Like you'd be so rare because it's just, you're the only one. And I would love to have you as part of our collective. But it's just this, like, you love to hate how sneaky she is trying to get the Borg like one step ahead of all other species in Star Trek.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned Seska. I think the same way you do actually about her. Granted, she was only like 13 episodes, I found out, but of the whole series of Voyager, but I mean, but definitely in the first 2 years, first she's like, okay, you don't really know what's going on, but I mean, the first air, you don't know when it first was on, you didn't know, because now with streaming, you watch it, you watched it back in the 90s, for example, you go like, oh, this Seska person, I don't know what this person's like. She's okay. But then later on in that first season, when it's revealed that she was this and stuff like that, and she did all this stuff because she joined the Kazon because she hated Janeway for stranding them in the quadrant in the first place, and she had that vendetta against Janeway the whole time, and then you watch now with streaming. Now we got these pleasurable streaming services like Hulu or Paramount Plus or Netflix, and it's coming. It's coming, and you go like, oh, it doesn't really reveal that surprise anymore that it once had regarding Seska. But I mean, kudos to Martha Hackett who played her, but and she even tormented the crew after she died, because she died in the first episode of season 3. But she did 2 more about a holodeck simulation that Tuvok had done, and the other one was just because it was a time period wibbly wobbly timey thing.
Yeah.
So, but definitely she wreaked havoc on the crew even after she passed, even after the character passed away. So, but definitely, yeah. And the Borg Queen, she only appeared like 5 times. So, but you're right. She left an impression on the Voyager crew and as well as the Enterprise crew, because that was her introduction, was in First Contact. So, definitely, the Borg Queen was only appeared 5 times in the entire franchise, but yeah, definitely have to predict with that. So. I think that's all about this. Do you have anything you'd like to add, Kenzie, about the villainousness or anything like that?
No, just a great reflection on some of our favorite characters throughout Star Trek, as well as our favorite villains that all happen to be women, as well as just kind of touching base on the journey that Star Trek has been through of getting rid of stereotypes and diversifying their writing for women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely we can revisit this another time too. If we missed any, please let us know, obviously. I know we're missing a few of them here or there.
I'd love to hear. Yeah, I mean, you can never cover them all. And that's the beauty, right? It's exciting to say that we missed some, because that means there's a lot. There's more to be said. And that gives me hope, because that means that there's a lot to be talked about with it, which means that it's something that is relevant in Star Trek now. And I would love to hear any other favorite characters people have, or favorite villains that happen to be women, or not, non-binary characters that felt like icons for minorities, just women as a general group were underrepresented in Star Trek, but so were plenty of other non-white guy characters. So definitely. I would love to hear the other characters that you felt were representative of something that's important to you.
Yeah, definitely. If you have any comments about that kind of thing, you want to mention those, feel free to email us or message us, or leave a comment, because we definitely, we can definitely revisit this topic in the future with what you just said. And, Kenzie, regarding other representatives of other genders or minorities, that kind of thing, that's perfectly fine. We can definitely talk about that in a future episode. But episode 6, which will be next week. We're just gonna do like kind of like I don't know how to describe it. A discussion about a video game of Star Trek. The Star Trek Next Generation video game that was released in the 90s. So until next time, live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.